Kagan, and I'm a student in the Faculty of Land and Food Systems studying food and resource economics. And I've been studying seafood and traceability for the past few years. I did some work at Oceana, which is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., which is what I'm going to share with you today. So this is the report that I was working on while I was at Oceana. It was called Stolen Seafood, and it tries to connect the two big problems of illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing with fraudulent seafood. What we were finding was that there are huge profits to be made and very small penalties for both of these legal infractions. And this is primarily due to opaque supply chains within the seafood supply. So seafood fraud is this idea that you can mislabel seafood to get to sell a lower value fish for a higher value fish and make a lot of profit. And even if you know a lot about seafood, it's really easy to do. It's very easy to be tricked by fraudulent seafood. So this is just, I think, a really interesting graphic. We all thought we knew quite a bit about all these fish, and we didn't realize it when we went out to dinner and sent our seafood into the lab to get tested. So as I said, the seafood supply chain is very complicated, so it's hard to tell when you find mislabeled seafood exactly who's to blame. It could be the restaurant, or it could be the fisher, or anywhere in between. Seafood can be caught at sea and transshipped before getting processed in a different country, exported. Secondary processing could happen in a domestic market where it gets distributed and then maybe even re-exported again. And all of these moments in production are open to fraud and mislabeling. And illegal fishing really benefits from mislabeling seafood because it's easy to put illegal seafood into the supply when it's so easy to mislabel seafood. So if you can imagine, it opens this whole market to illegal seafood and reduces the cost greatly. There's no cost, basically, to mislabeling your illegal seafood caught in a protected zone or with the wrong kind of gear or the wrong kind of fish, other than rewriting your whiteboard. So there are lots of different things that are going on to combat IUU fishing and seafood fraud, and I've divided them into these kind of four main categories, and there's a lot of overlap between them. So technology would be things like vessel monitoring systems. Databases is a lot of the work that's happening here at the Fisheries Center with catch documentation, and it could also be global vessel registries. Border control is customs inspections, so only 2% of the seafood in the United States is inspected at the border. And enforcement is monitoring, control, and surveillance, and increased cooperation between authorities. What I'm going to talk about is traceability, which I think fits between technology and databases. And one method of traceability is using barcodes. And when I started doing this project, a lot of the scientists were asking if it was genetic barcoding, and I said, no, it's actually just barcodes, like you might find on a box of crackers at the store. So barcodes were invented in the 1950s in response to grocery store owners who were frustrated by how long the checkout process was taking. They developed the Universal Product Code, and quickly they learned that it wasn't just speed, but also information that they got when they used UPCs. So all of a sudden they could tell who was buying what, when, and they could adjust their inventories to fit that demand, and overall grocery sales increased by 10% after UPCs were introduced. So this powerful information is the key to traceability systems and the key to why barcoding is so important. GS1 is the international organization. It's a not-for-profit that oversees all barcode administration. They oversee 6 billion daily transactions with 200 members, 200 million members, I believe. And their whole mission is to assign barcodes and set standards for traceability programs. Their mantra is to identify, capture, and share data, and you do this by keeping track of your critical tracking events and your key data elements. So things like packaging, processing, sales, and characteristics like location and contents of a product. And all of this information gets put into a barcode that then follows the product along the supply chain. So there are lots of different kinds of barcodes. These are just a few examples. The UPC, like I mentioned, is a very basic barcode that's used in retail. The GS1 is a high-density barcode, and it's very large and can handle a lot of information. And it's used on pallets and containers. In contrast, the data matrix is very small. It looks like a QR code that you might want to scan with your smartphone, but it's not that. it can be just 3 millimeters high and can contain about the same information that a GS128 can. So depending on the scale of your product, this could be an important barcode for that. The RFID is an interesting barcode because it uses different machinery, so it's an additional capital investment for businesses, but it really reduces the labor cost of inventory. So all you have to do is walk past an RFID tagged inventory with a reader rather than scanning each individual barcode. So GS1 has paired up with the National Fisheries Institute to create a traceability guide for seafood in the United States. And this is mostly because of this legal mandate that's come out of these two pieces of legislation, the Bioterrorism Act and the Food Safety Modernization Act. And both of these acts mandate traceability within food systems, but they don't give an outline for how to do that. So GS1 has said, we know how to do it, here's what you should do. And what they're really focusing on is external traceability. So most businesses have a fairly robust internal traceability system, but the idea of knowing where your product came from and where it's going, so a one step down, one step up traceability, would really change the whole system, which is not that radical. But it's not just a mandate, it's also really good for business to have a rigorous traceability system. If you can remember the spinach recall in 2006 because of E. coli, they had to remove the entire supply of spinach from the US market, which cost a lot to both producers and consumers of spinach. And if they had had a good traceability system, it could have just taken out the bad spinach and known which farmer or which processor that spinach came from, you would have saved a lot of money. And seafood has the same human health implications, but it also has this other issue of sustainability. Traceability systems can be used to encourage sustainable purchasing choices. And we've already seen that consumers are really willing to make decisions about their consumption of seafood based on environmental considerations. But if somebody uses their seafood watch card to buy wild salmon because they think that that's the environmentally responsible choice, and they're served fraudulent farm salmon, they haven't had the impact that they were hoping that they would have. So there's this disconnect between consumer choice and what they're actually buying. So one project that's actually, okay, sorry. Okay, yes. Okay, so one project that's actually doing this is the Gulf Seafood, which is the Gulf of Mexico, which suffered some huge losses after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Consumers didn't think it was safe to eat Gulf seafood anymore, and they were really concerned about the source. They're also competing on the global market for things like shrimp that can be produced much more cheaply in other parts of the world. So the fishers in this area have banded together and started this traceability program, and the idea is to connect consumers to the producers of their seafood and create a brand for Gulf seafood through traceability. So this is where the QR codes come back in. And consumers can scan a QR code with their smartphone and then access all of the information that's been gathered by the barcodes along the supply chain and see exactly where their seafood has been and who caught it, what vessel it came from, and when. So traceability is not a silver bullet. It's not going to get rid of illegal seafood or fraudulent seafood, but it will increase the cost of providing that seafood to the market. So if you imagine right now, all you have to do is change the whiteboard on your fishing counter. Now you would have to go into a computer system, change the data, create a new barcode, and it increases the cost of the supply chain, hopefully reducing the supply in the long run of fraudulent seafood. Traceability also increases information about our marine resources, creates accountability for fishers, it incurs a cost on illegal fishers, and it creates consumer power to make sustainable choices and bring more people into the conversation about ocean sustainability. And I think that along with a whole suite of policy options, traceability is a really good way to combat these